From a defabricated solar-powered garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, how to keep your cool at the next work Zoom meeting when you're staring down the barrel of a feline sphincter. And now, the podcast host who has no problem with such things because cats' anuses are all the rage, Pete Dominic!
Well, those are the kind of intros that I get so worried about because I have such serious guests on today's show, Pete. Now they're going to be really worried. I mean, I have a guest today who is so highfalutin and important. She's from the Century Foundation, which is a think tank that does really, really good work, drives policy change to make people's lives better. Her name is Kimberly Knackstedt. She's got a PhD, and you're talking about cat's anuses. I also have the great David Rothkopf, who is not going to much appreciate that either, Pete. So, you know, I hope this isn't the last time we get such serious guests because of your sophomoric introductions to the show about a cat's rear end, which personally I absolutely love. So let's just get on with it. Hello, and thank you for joining me today. Like I said, two excellent guests on today's podcast. I have like an hour conversation with each one of them. So if you want to skip ahead, if you want to listen to my conversation with a fascinating woman who has worked in schools, she's worked on Capitol Hill in the legislative branch for both a congressman and a senator, and then was appointed by Joe Biden to help run disability policy for the Domestic Policy Council, then you can skip ahead to 55 minutes. That's where my conversation with Dr. Knackstedt starts. But before that, I have an awesome conversation with David Rothkopf, who I covered a lot of ground with. He's always a great guest, and I think you're really going to like it. I just want to say, before I get to both of my guests, thank you to everybody who listened to the entire show yesterday. I had a almost 2-hour show yesterday. At the very end, I left a little nugget in there, and I want to thank everybody who listened all the way to the end and heard that nugget. You are my bumblebees. You know what I'm talking about. Karen and David and Jeff, Brian, Sean, Joe, Ryan, Kim, Anne-Marie, Eric, Carrie, Anthony, Tina, Dean, Scott, Will, Sandman, and of course Kevin Richburg. I probably missed a few people in there, but a lot of people mentioning they listened right there to the end of the show, and they heard me mention the keyword, and all of them emailed me. Thank you guys. You guys are awesome. Everybody listening is awesome. If you haven't signed up for a paid subscription, you're not as awesome, but you're still awesome, but I hope that you do. StandUpWithPete.com right now. We have, I think, like 740 paid subscribers. Can we get to 800 by the end of February? I know that's a lofty goal. I don't know how I could possibly turn that many listeners into subscribers, but maybe I can get a few of you, maybe 10, maybe not 60, maybe 10. Can we do it? Go to StandUpWithPete.com right now. For as little as $5 a month, you can sign up to support the show. You can get access to the Discord platform, our amazing community that hangs out every Thursday night at 8 p.m. East. Sign up now, StandUpWithPete.com. I just want to mention that there was an absolutely devastating earthquake that rocked southeastern Turkey and northwestern Syria early yesterday. According to officials, more than 4,300 people are dead. And that's on Monday at 9 p.m. The death toll is certain to go up. And just to see, to hear, to read, to see the images of these buildings collapsing, it's absolutely devastating. And I wanted to acknowledge it here on the podcast. It is a horrible thing, and I don't know what to say about it other than not taking it for granted, life for granted, and hoping that if there's anything anyone can do to help, that we do. But thousands of buildings toppled, both sides of the border. Death toll expected to rise. Rescue workers, of course, searching for survivors in the massive piles of rubble. Always look for the helpers. Just there's just no words. 13,000 injured, and Turkey has declared 7 days of mourning. And just we'll know more about it tomorrow, and maybe I'll have something more to talk about tomorrow. I'm not sure what else there is to say. I just wanted to acknowledge that. Seems like the only thing we should be thinking about or talking about with such a massive loss of life. Also wanted to acknowledge the Florida man and Maryland woman who have been arrested on federal charges for plotting to attack multiple energy substations with the goal of destroying Baltimore. According to the U.S. Department of Justice yesterday, The suspects conspired to inflict maximum harm on the power grid with the aim to completely destroy Baltimore, according to top FBI officials at a Monday morning press conference. They are said to have had extremist views. You think? You think they had extremist views based on that? Oh, yeah, it says here they were neo-Nazis right here in good old US of A. And this is a really scary domestic terrorist plot. I haven't read that much into it. I'm not sure how far along it was, but serious development suggesting the far-right threat in the United States, specifically neo-Nazi white supremacists, still very acute, according to experts who study this all day, every day. The arrests come after a series of attacks on energy substations nationwide, including one in December, North Carolina, that left 45,000 utility customers without electricity for days and prompted local officials to declare a state of emergency. The Department of Homeland Security has warned about similar attacks recently. A National Terrorism Advisory System bulletin issued November 30th said individuals and groups motivated by a range of ideological beliefs and personal grievances continue to pose a persistent and lethal threat to the homeland. This is not going away. I've talked about this as much as anything throughout my career in broadcasting, and I won't stop. These people are here. They are amongst us. They are Americans. They are white. They are right-wing, neo-Nazi, white supremacists, Christian nationalists, and we have to do everything we can to expose them to stop their ideology from spreading. All right? What else can I tell you? So you got a horrible earthquake, neo-Nazis wanting to destroy Baltimore. Well, the President of the United States will be delivering his State of the Union tonight at 9 p.m., and so that'll be interesting. I think it's being written by the Chat GPT. It's being written by AI. Who will George Santos be bringing as a guest? Some kind of fictional hero, maybe someone in drag. No, he wouldn't do that. Oh, speaking of which, will Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene and other Republicans, will they behave? Should be an interesting State of the Union tonight. Will you be watching? I don't know if I'll watch. He's not the best speaker. I'll watch it in double speed later on, or I'll read the transcript. I'm sure it'll be a well-written speech. Should be interesting, and I think it's still important. I like the State of the Union. I think it's important no matter what, who's giving it. But we'll see. It's only becoming potentially less important with everything that's going on. All right, well, let me get to my guests, shall we? I don't really have much more to say. I've got two excellent conversations coming your way. They both clock in at almost an hour, and I'm really happy with both these conversations. I think you're going to learn a lot about them. If you think at all about disability and folks living with disability, which is an identity, really. I learned a lot about it from today's guest, Dr. Kimberly Knackstedt, joining me for the first time here on the show, coming highly recommended from one of my all-time favorite guest experts, Rebecca Vallis. She's a senior fellow and co-director of the Century Foundation's Disability Economic Justice Collaborative. She was the first director of disability policy for the Domestic Policy Council for the Biden-Harris administration. And that starts at 55 minutes. But first, it's one of my favorite guests to talk to these days. I always love talking to David Rothkopf. He is a foreign policy, national security, political affairs analyst and commentator, founder and CEO of the TRG Media, the Rothkopf Group. He's a columnist for Daily Beast, member of USA Today Board of Contributors, author of 10 books, including most recently American Resistance, the inside story of how the deep state saved the nation, just out at the end of last year. You can follow him and should be on Twitter at DJ Rothkopf. Listen to his podcast, a series of podcasts at Deep State Radio. I love talking to David Rothkopf. Today was no exception, so let's kick it off right now. All right. Very excited anytime I get to talk to David Rothkopf. Hell, I get excited when a new article drops because I always love to get his point of view. Thank you for joining me. And how's the energy? Are we going to have a lot of energy today?
No, very low energy. I have balloon fatigue. It's like this story is so boring, but we keep sticking with it.
Well, it is really actually a great story for media that uses imagery. I mean, it's a great story to talk about. Everybody kind of understands it's a Chinese spy balloon, and our president's too weak to shoot it down. I mean, it's a pretty great narrative.
Oh, Jesus Christ! Really? That's where we're going with this?
Well,
okay. Let's look at that. Let's look at that. First
hold
of all,
on. I just want to say,
yes.
I look at every news story through how will it be interpreted from Fox and Friends and across that network, much less the rest. That's how I start, and that's exactly what I think I just described. The weak president won't shoot down the spy balloon, and Marco Rubio said he was weak too.
Look, it's such a dumb story. Let's start with the dumbness, and then we'll go to the extreme dumbness. Okay, like first of all countries spy on each other all the time, right? We know that, right? Like we have hundreds of spy satellites, hundreds. We spend tens of billions of dollars every year spying on everybody. Okay, that's fine. We're America. We get to do that. Everybody does it. Everybody does it. China has something like 65 or 70 military satellites up there. Some of them perform non-spying functions. Some of them perform reconnaissance functions. That's going on all the time. They have spies here, just like we have spies in their country. You think that there's Chinese spies? You think there's Chinese spies in America, David Rothkopf? I'm not sure about you, Pete. They're everywhere. Yes, of course there are Chinese spies in America, just like there are American spies in China. Countries do this. They have always done this since the dawn of time. As one of the good CIA guys I know likes to say, it's the second oldest profession. It's been around a long time. So does this balloon put us at greater risk than we were before? It's a balloon. Of course it doesn't put us at greater risk than it did before. Have there been balloons before this balloon? Well, there were 3 balloons during the Trump administration, at least, that were detected. The Chinese, according to reports that I have heard, have had balloons out over 5 continents. People try everything. Do we have a fleet of balloons out there? No, we don't need to, because we've got hundreds of spy satellites. But they're trying this. Is this balloon a little different because it spent a little more time over the United States? And maybe because it was a little more sophisticated? Yeah. Is it a threat? Is it something we should, sort of discourage the Chinese from doing? Yeah. Should we have canceled the trip of the Secretary of State to go to China? No. The point is, if you've got a problem, communicate. I happen to know that when the White House started seeing this, one of the problems we have is we don't have good communications channels with the Chinese. That should worry people because, misunderstandings happen. But it didn't make us any more at risk. It isn't something different from what all countries do. It was a pretty easy to deal with thing. As soon as they saw it, they jammed it. They stopped it from sending signals back. They decided not to shoot it down over, places where people live and waited until it got over the ocean to shoot it down. Shooting it down was not exactly a challenge for an F-22. But everybody's talking about it. And it's like, oh, Biden's weak. The balloon got the best of. Come on.
Remember when they would make parody movies? Well, they made a parody movie of Top Gun starring Charlie Sheen. I forget what it was called. Yeah. And that would be this parody movie of Top Gun if F-22 went up and there was a balloon and they missed it. I mean, it wasn't.
That would be just about as funny as the Charlie Sheen movie was, which it wasn't.
Oh, I disagree. It was one of the greatest films of all time. I got to look it up now and to correct you. I'm joking. I'm just trying to be adversarial. The point being, it wasn't a hard mission to shoot it down. And I think there are probably a lot of Americans that were trying to shoot it down. But the more important point is, I mean, seriously, there must have been a lot of those guys just
the idiots.
Probably filled with Kit Kats.
Marjorie Taylor Greene characters who are like sitting there with their, AR-15s in their backyard trying to hit something at 65,000 feet, a moving, sure. But the point is, should this be changing the U.S.-China relationship? No. Should this be overshadowing the fact that we now have record job creation and that there was an amazing job report last Friday? No. Should this be overshadowing the State of the Union? No. should this be putting us all at greater risk? No, but it does, because now that we shot down this balloon, what happens the next time something enters our airspace, gets near to our airspace? What happens the next time something of ours enters somebody else's airspace? Are we setting a new standard? Is this where we're going with this? Because that's a more dangerous world.
Are you saying they never should have shot it down?
Honestly, I think they should have tracked it. They should have learned what they could learn from it. They should have stopped it from being effective in terms of surveillance. Probably shouldn't have been turned into the big Megillah it was turned into. If they want to shoot it down, fine. But my sense is it's gotten blown up by the media because, well, it's just such a, like, it's a, as you say, it's an entertaining story.
Yeah, it's easy to understand. Very easy to understand in one sentence. There's a Chinese spy balloon above Montana, and then you can take whatever you want from that and create all kinds of fun narratives too. And they did. I mean, Maria Bartiromo said all kinds of crazy stuff, and so did Republican Congress people. But so
Maria Bartiromo.
Yeah,
I mean, do you remember when she was like semi-credible?
I do. I knew her over at CNBC. I mean, I didn't know her well, but I worked at CNBC.
I was on her show a few times, and she was semi-credible, when she was doing Wall Street stuff. She said, what if the balloon was filled with little surveillance technologies that were solar operated that would never go away? And the Chinese knew we would shoot it down. And now all throughout our air are all these secret Chinese. I mean, this is tinfoil hat stuff.
They have writers that are, certainly at Tucker Carlson and at her show and others, that they're really just coming up with whatever they want for what ifs. There's a lot of just novel like fiction, crappy stuff. But like, what if the Keebler elves were dropped and there were nanobots, and you can say whatever you wanted, and there's just writers that are coming up with it. It works. It's effective.
It's extremely effective, and there are people out there. I saw a poll today, Washington Post, ABC poll. A majority of Americans don't think President Biden's gotten a lot done. Well, I mean, that's just dumb, right? I mean, you could say what you want. You could say Biden is old. You could say he's not very interesting. You could say he doesn't communicate very well. You could say you wish he did more with this or you wish he did more with that. But we know what presidents do. And we have seen the rescue package. We have seen the bipartisan infrastructure deal. We've seen the anti-inflation bill. We've seen the CHIPS science package. We have seen bipartisan movement on a variety of issues. We've seen 12 million jobs created in 2 years. I'm not doing an ad for the president. I'm just saying there are facts. Well, the facts are he's gotten a lot done. And so but the media prefers the story that he hasn't. And half the media, the Fox half of the media, just is making shit up.
Yeah.
And so you end up with, the majority of American people believing something that's just not true.
How should media be reporting this? How should an administration, what should their PR strategy be? I mean, when you get a lot of good things done, you want to post a sign up that said, we brought you this bridge. Thank you. I mean, Trump was signing checks with his own name because he understands marketing. But it's a hard thing to do, to communicate it. Why do you think the disconnect in such a polling question is? What's the Biden administration supposed to do? And Rothkopf, you're telling media that they should be doing what differently? Any of those questions?
Well, the job of the media is to report on the facts, right? It's not to become the story. Too often it becomes the story. They do these polls, and if there's a poll out there that shows that the majority of the American people don't think Biden's got anything done, that's not a poll about Biden. That's a poll about the media. That's saying that the media has not done their job of reporting what's gotten done, or it has not gotten through. Now, having said that, should the administration do more to communicate this? Should they have all their cabinet out there doing it? Yeah, now they do. They have a coordinator on the infrastructure thing. They've got a coordinator on each of these big bills who's out there. They're doing it. But they haven't recently they've been a little more effective. They've had a couple of big press events around infrastructure that were kind of good.
Why don't they just give Pete Buttigieg his own YouTube channel and he can just talk all day long?
Yeah. Well, they try to get him out there a lot. Of course, he's got some issues, Southwest Airlines, some other things that are occupying his time over there at the Department of Transportation. But the point is, Pete Buttigieg is a good communicator. Jennifer Granholm is a good communicator. Yeah. Gina Raimondo is a good communicator. There are 20 governors out there who are good communicators. More could be done and better.
Okay, so I wanted to get back to the China issue because I wanted to ask you about, I read this Sebastian Mallaby. I've never read him at the Washington Post. Do you generally have feelings about his work?
He's a smart guy. He's been around a long time.
China's suspected spy balloon is the perfect symbol of its clumsiness. Poorly titled column. But basically, I read this column and it gave me the impression that the Biden administration has done a really good job navigating, negotiating, and reacting to all the circumstances that have unfolded in China, which has really changed the dynamic in the economy in a rapid 2 years, given the COVID-19 lockdowns and the failure around that, obviously. And then also the demographic issue, which people are looking at as a huge crisis. And he also, I think, maybe I'm misunderstanding what he writes, that the big initiative, the Belt and Road Initiative, has gotten in some trouble in Africa, specifically because they were over leveraged. The African nations couldn't pay back these loans, and now they didn't navigate that well. And the point being that the dynamic has changed, and the Biden administration is working very quickly to take advantage of it as much as they can. I forgot to mention the semiconductor deals and other things. What do you make the Philippines deal? What do you make of his? That's my conclusion of his narrative. Is that what's happening kind of in the last couple of years with China-U.S. relations?
Well, it's obviously a very, very big topic. In fact, I call kind of China the everything policy, the everything topic, because if you look at U.S. competitiveness policy, U.S. jobs policy, U.S. infrastructure policy, U.S. environmental policy, U.S. healthcare policy, U.S. foreign policy, U.S. national security policy, China's at the center of it all.
Right.
When Biden gave his first speech, everything was about China. When Tony Blinken gave his first big speech as Secretary of State, everything was about China. They have very successfully done what the predecessors in this century were unable to do. They have shifted U.S. foreign policy's focus to China. They have put together new alliances to deal with it, either AUKUS with the Australians and the UK, or elevating the Quad alliance between Japan, the Quad conversations process between Japan and the US and Australia and India, or, as you say, doing work with the Philippines, or building an international economic agreement, which they've done. All those things are quite positive. My concern is that there are people in the administration and out of it who feel that we are inevitably headed to conflict with China, that this is, should be the beginning of a Cold War, that they are our enemy. And if you look at some people on the far right and the way they talked about this balloon and so forth, that's the vibe you get. There are 70,000 U.S. businesses operating in China. We can't solve problems with North Korea without China. Can't deal with COVID without China. Can't deal with climate change without China. We have to work with them. It's not like the Soviet Union where it was a zero-sum game and every loss of theirs was a gain for us. And so I think the Biden administration has been right to prioritize it. They've come up with big, nuanced, complicated, and appropriate policies to deal with a lot of things. But I still think we're at risk, largely because of the kind of political mood that you've seen around this balloon situation, of getting into a black and white, overly simplistic, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad kind of relationship with China. And that's wrong too. They're a rival, they're a competitor. They are building up their military forces. There's plenty to be wary of. But where we can communicate, we should communicate. Where we can cooperate, we should cooperate. Where we've got to compete, we should compete. And where we have to stand up to them, we should stand up to them.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about these issues because you know how it all works and how the sausage is made and even many of the players. And I've always thought that's really important to talk to people who really have experience with it because these relationships between foreign countries are very complicated, even smaller foreign countries for a number of reasons. And that's why there's lots and lots of people working on them and living there. And it's interesting that I think people just realize everything's a zero-sum game. It's good or bad, and it all can be explained in a short, quick segment on television. And it does such an injustice to the opinions and the results, I think, for each side. I can't speak for China. I have no idea how their media works. But people really don't understand what you just said about how complex the relationship is. And I don't know.
Well, it's hard to communicate. And I have to say, and I'll just probably piss some people off by saying it, but you can think of a bunch of new media operations that have cropped up in the past few years where their whole goal is tell a story in 250 words. Let's make it punchy. Let's just put out a couple of bullet points there. And there are a lot of stories maybe that, you can sort of gloss them in that period of time. But, things like China, climate, arms control, Middle East, a lot of foreign policy, a lot of domestic policy issues. They require expert analysis and in-depth.
Yeah.
That's what we try to do at my company, the smallest media company in the world. But, I really think people do themselves a disservice if they go read the Axios or Semaphore, 150 word summary, or, Politico puts out a newsletter and it's like, this is a headache for Biden. Next, another story about a headache for Biden.
You captured that in a thread on Twitter. I think it was this morning where you just said, I'll read it real quick. Some mornings I just can't. I don't have the patience to read the quote news. Today, my special problem are stories that are written as though they're about someone or something, but are actually about the media, the reporters writing them. Examples include New York Times stories saying the vice president's struggling to define herself when what she's struggling against is unfair coverage and false narratives about her that are perpetuated by the media itself. We have a Washington Post story, you write, saying Americans don't believe Biden has gotten much done during his first 2 years in office. Since it's a provable fact that he's gotten a historic amount done, this is actually a story about media failure written as though it's about a Biden failure. And finally, you say you've got all these multiple stories about the China balloon story impacts the president or the U.S. policy, when a huge percentage of that story is media hype of an otherwise not terribly significant event. The formula is the same in each case. The media creates a false or deceptive narrative that writes a story about the consequences of the narrative as though it played no part in creating the circumstances about which it was reporting. I have to believe we can do better. Rothkopf, that was masterful, as was my reading of it.
I'm not going to tweet anymore. I'm just going to send notes to you, and I would like you to read them out to the world if you agree with me. But the story of this that triggered me the most this morning was this story about the vice president saying she has struggled to define herself. And I thought, define herself with whom? Who has she struggled with? Who has failed to get her message? Well, obviously, it's the media. She's not going door to door across America. The way she defines herself is with them. And they just simply have not, they just simply have not bought into the message, even though her approval rating is roughly the same approval rating of every vice president in the past 30 years. She's actually gotten more done than most of them. And if you want a good example, a good comparison, 2 years into the Obama administration, most people thought his vice president was sort of dull and gray and didn't have a political future. And, that was Joe Biden. So, let's just get a grip, see things for what they are.
It's funny, to be fair, I suppose Joe Biden was in Barack Obama's shadow. Kamala Harris is in Joe Biden's shadow, which isn't quite as, what adjective do I want to use? But, someone, who is it? Michael Cohen, I know that you like Kamala Harris, and I do too, but Michael Cohen was here, the writer, not the lawyer, and he was basically saying that he didn't think, I think he wrote something about it, I wanted to get you on with him, that she wasn't a very good politician.
Oh, yeah, she's a terrible politician. She was elected twice as district attorney in San Francisco, twice as the attorney general of California, twice to the United States Senate. And then she played a vital role in getting Joe Biden elected in a number of critical states. So, that's just bullshit. And, does some of it have to do with the fact that she's a woman? Yes. Does some of it have to do with the fact that she is a person of color? Yes. Let's, open our eyes to that, because the stories about her, she doesn't get along with her staff. Well, what does that sound like? Amy Klobuchar's, problems with her staff and eating her salad with her hair comb or whatever. I mean, or Hillary Clinton, there is a narrative about women in American politics that is unfair. There is a narrative about people of color that is often unfair and tinged by racism. The media's job is to strip that away and say, how does she compare with other vice presidents in polling? How does she compare with other vice presidents in number of trips she's taken, jobs that she's done, difficult tasks she's undertaken, her ability to communicate? I maybe you saw her at that funeral in Atlanta last week. She was masterful, powerful. Now, this is not all about her. As I indicated, there were some other stories out there where, the media creates a narrative and then goes, this dopey politician, he's got to deal with this problem narrative. Why can't he figure that out? And it's like, well, you created the narrative.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Dead on. I love your media criticism. I love you. I'm in love with you.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I'm getting a little uncomfortable.
I want to discuss another really important piece of yours. I'm so glad that you wrote this. This is kind of went, because of how we are with Trump and Trump-related anything, I feel like it went kind of undercovered. You have a piece at the Daily Beast titled, "Trump is still a Putin stooge and a traitor to his country." And you write, as the late, great poet Maya Angelou might have said, had she thought it was necessary, when someone shows you over and over and over again that they are a traitor, believe them. For further, completely appropriate emphasis, she might have elaborated, when someone shows you over and over and over and over again in their entire lives, for their entire lives in business and in government, that they are not only traitors, but corrupt, ignorant, pathologically dishonest, coup-plotting, racist, misogynistic traitors, then, seriously, I'm not kidding about this, believe them. And Donald Trump has done that again, as you write specifically in this, in a couple of different instances recently, but basically, again, doubling down. And the worst thing he ever said, in my opinion, when he was in Helsinki, Finland, in 2018, and said that he trusted Putin over his own intel agencies and Americans. He went back and said it again. And that's why this article and this issue is so important that you mentioned this. Go ahead, pick up the slack, because I was aghast when he said that.
Well, it was horrible. It was horrible, as you say, when he said it in Helsinki. But it's something different about him saying it now.
Right.
What's different is that Putin launched a war against Ukraine, has committed countless atrocities, been responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands, of torture, of rape, of attacking all the values of the West. We're locked in a war with this guy. And now, Trump has had a couple of years to think about it. And he goes, no, I still like him better than I like the FBI. I like him better than I like the CIA, people who put their lives on the line for the United States of America every single day. And, as we've learned, the Trump administration cooked up this Durham investigation to show that the investigations into him by Comey and others were unfair, Mueller. And guess what? It went nowhere.
Yeah.
Because they were fair. In fact, the only thing wrong with those investigations is that when they got to Attorney General Barr, he buried them. He didn't follow through with those kinds of things. So, Trump, time and time again, I mean, look at what he's been writing about Ashley Babbitt. And, she's the hero. And, he's been attacking Capitol Hill police who were trying to protect the Capitol, against people like her who were breaking the law, violating, putting people's lives at risk, threatening the health and safety of members of Congress. He's on the wrong side, not just of political issues. He has taken the side of our enemies. He has taken the side of people who want to systematically damage and destroy our institutions and our country. And I think, since he's still the leading Republican candidate, still, after all that we've got to call it out. We've got, think that this outraged you when he said this thing about Helsinki. What did you think of the response of Republican leadership to it?
I'll never forget the way that they either ducked it or avoided
crickets.
it. It was
crickets.
It was
nothing.
He walked it back, by the way. If you remember, Trump said, I didn't say that exactly what I said. And then he is just, no one ever, I think, trusted his cleanup on that or really bought it. But more importantly,
last week he said it again.
Last week he said it again.
Last week, crickets again.
And as you put it, he's so much worse of a guy. His record is now hundreds of thousands of dead people, many innocent, an invasion into another sovereign nation and everything that you just listed. And yet he's saying it again. And what that means and how Republicans shouldn't have to answer for that everywhere they go. Everywhere they go, they should have to be asked about the leader of their party siding with Vladimir Putin still. And
all the other people in the party who go along with it or who took money from Oleg Deripaska or other Russian oligarchs like Mitch McConnell or, some of those other folks. The reality is the Republican Party has embraced Putin, embraced Putinism. They went to Hungary or they had Viktor Orban come over. They're going back. They love this guy who loves Putin. They've chosen sides. And weirdly, one of the two political parties in America, when asked to chose the side that was against America.
Yeah. And I mean, in light of that article and everything that you're saying here, did you see that? I forget what committee hearing it was last week when Republicans are questioning Maxine Waters and other Democrats saying, doing the whole, do you denounce communism? Do you denounce socialism? And then she and everybody else said, do you now denounce Trump?
During the hearing, one of the people said, listed a bunch of leaders and said, what connects all these people? And she said, Trump.
Yes, because the question, obviously what you're saying here, and it's always crazy for anybody of a certain age to imagine that Republicans are now supportive, and many Republicans, and certainly in media, of Russia and Vladimir Putin because of where they came from, Republicans. But more importantly, it's just a support of authoritarianism. That's what they like about Putin, that he's a strong man, and they should all have to be asked about that, I feel like. Every Republican, what do you think of authoritarianism in strong men like Putin? Because Donald Trump loves him.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, Americans need to, stand up and push back on this movement, because there is a systematic movement led by Putin, but includes Orban. Look what's happening in Italy with the neo-fascists who are, trying to shut down the press and free speech. You saw the rise of Le Pen in France. We saw Bolsonaro in Brazil. The president of Mexico, Lopez Obrador, is trying to cut back on certain fundamental rights of the Mexican people. He's up for election in a year and a half. We'll see whether he actually, runs again. In India, Modi has been promoting Hindu nationalism and undermining democracy. Clearly Xi has been doing the same thing in China. We've seen the same thing happening in places like the Philippines. So, it's just time to stop and say, even as we were saying earlier about nuance, there are some things that aren't nuanced. There's some things where it's just right or wrong.
Right.
The side that Donald Trump is on, the side that GOP leadership is on, in terms of issues of democracy, rights, free speech, and American national interests, it's wrong. They're on the wrong side.
And finally, along that, I mean, it's been a year. It'll be a year at the end of this month that Russia invaded Ukraine. You have a recent piece, and you've been talking about this, of course, for a long time. At the Beast, at the Daily Beast, we've done lots for Ukraine, but winning will take much more. And there's this controversy about the tanks, apparently, which I don't even understand. But more importantly, it's people hear the different numbers. They pay a certain amount of attention to a conflict, but eventually the American public gets exhausted with seeing how much support we are giving the Ukrainians in this way. This has kind of happened throughout history, but so often, we've gotten it wrong. We'll make the case, for spending lots and lots of money and supporting Ukraine for a longer period of time.
Well, there are a couple of ways to make the case. One is that we've discovered throughout history is that if you don't stand up to aggressors like this, then you have subsequent consequences, whether it was, minimizing the threat of Hitler or Mussolini or other instances of it, appeasing the Nazis as the British did. But more specifically, as the countries of Eastern Europe know, if you don't stand up and fight Putin and defeat Putin here, he's going to want to do it again. And if he does it again, he goes into a NATO country, like one of the countries of the Baltics, we're obligated to fight him. Now, do you want to fight World War III against the Russians? Or do you want to defeat them and their will to go and do that again here simply by underwriting weapons? It's a bargain. What we're doing, right, the Ukrainians are saying, we will fight, we will die, we will put our country on the line, just help us out here with weapons and aid. That's a bargain for us, given the size of the threat of what Putin would do if he isn't stopped here. But if Putin thinks he wins here, if we stop our aid funding and all of a sudden he gets 20, 30, 40% of Ukraine, and he can go to his people and say, see, that worked. Well, then the cost is going to be compounded because it's going to happen again. The final thing I would say is, even if you get a decent settlement, if you don't rebuild Ukraine, if you don't make it strong enough to fight on its own again, if you don't send a message to Putin that Ukraine is now going to be closer to Europe, integrated into the EU, partners with NATO in one way or another, you're also going to have this problem. So we're right to fund them. We should continue to fund them. We should give them more of what they want earlier. And we need to recognize that we're about to embark on the biggest rebuilding job since World War II, estimated in excess of $750 billion in Ukraine. And we've got to lead that way, although the international community is going to be responsible for it. But we've got to pay these things because they're investments in peace.
What do you say, though, just quickly to the argument about Soviet aggression in the 50s, in the Cold War, 60s, 70s, and the 80s, from South Vietnam to South Korea to Afghanistan, and America's role, obviously, of more of a proxy war in Afghanistan, but we sent a lot of Americans to die in South Korea and more to die in Vietnam, and for what? And that was to stop the spread of communism. How is the argument different for Ukraine?
Well, first of all, this is not a situation where U.S. troops are on the ground, and nobody thinks U.S. troops should be on the ground. So this is really just a question of, economic support. And, if we've given $30-40 billion to the Ukrainians, well, that may sound like a lot of money in the context of the U.S. economy. It's actually a relatively small amount of money, and it's certainly something we can afford to do. So it's quite different in that regard. And, I have a lot of issues with how the Cold War was fought. Clearly, we made big errors in Vietnam. Korea didn't come out exactly the way we wanted it. We backed the wrong people in a lot of places. But the Soviet Union fell. the United States won the Cold War. And I think one of the things that we want to do is we now want to preserve the post-Cold War order and send a message that international law will prevail and aggressors will be defeated and punished.
Well said. I appreciate you taking on that point and everything else. What about those job numbers? How about the economy?
Excellent. 12 million jobs, more jobs than any president in modern history in terms of creation in the first couple of years. And by the way, and this is also a particularly important thing, all those people who said, oh, we need higher unemployment so we can fight inflation.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the real wages did not go up so much. Now, while that's tough for workers, the message, to those sort of neoliberal economists is, nope, you were wrong. Biden was right. Help the people, reduce the suffering, create the jobs. And if inflation goes up a little bit, we can find a way to manage it. We can bring it under control, and we can have an economy in which it performs for the middle and the bottom and not just for the top.
A lot of people in his administration who have that ideal. All right. Well, he's definitely running, right?
I think so, but he hasn't called me to tell me that.
And are you running?
No, I'll be right here the next time you call me.
Are you doing any cardio?
I do cardio every single day.
What's
I work
your
out
thing?
7 days a week.
Oh, do you really? Wow. What do you do?
I do 4 or 5 days a week. I do elliptical for 55 minutes
Good.
And weights for 20 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And then 3 or 4 days a week. And I know that adds up to more than 7 because it is. I play tennis for an hour or 2.
Good for you, Rothkopf. That's very impressive. Better than me. I got to catch up.
Well, I'm older than you and could die at any minute.
True of all of us, sir. True of all of us. Let's be clear.
Yeah, it's true.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, how great was Dave Rothkopf. But wait, if you like that, there's more. That's right, folks. At the end of the interview there, I pressed stop on 2 of the 3 devices that I record on, but I left it going on the 3rd one because Dave and I often have conversations. I've asked him before if I can share those conversations, and he was fine with it. And so here's a little bonus Rothkopf where I talked about this book I'm obsessed with. I mentioned on yesterday's podcast, Oliver Berkman's 4,000 Weeks. By the way, I reached out to him, and hopefully he'll come on soon. And so I threw that to Dave Rothkopf, and then we got deep, and there were some jokes. So now more bonus Rothkopf.
I am reading Oliver Berkman's 4,000 Weeks, and it has really changed my thinking, affected my thinking as much as any kind of. It's like
what is it about?
It's like the anti-self-help. He's like the anti-self-help guy. He's like, enough with this. Enough with this productivity, self-help. You can, 4 hour, all this. It's like you're never going to make it. You're never going to get your to-do list done. Stop it. And it's 4,000 weeks is if you live to 80, you get 4,000 weeks. And he quotes, I don't know, Robert Nagel or some philosopher says, you're going to be dead any minute. And it's a book came out a year ago, and everybody's talking to this guy now for a lot of different reasons, but it's really affected me. Anyway, 4,000 Weeks. Check it out. Let me know if you think it's nonsense, but I love it.
How can I argue with the premise? I mean, the premise is right? So, it's just like, you're absolutely right. Just have a sandwich.
Well, I'm fascinated. It's not necessarily, I'm fascinated with how people see their time, their life, their career, and how they spend how they think about it. And I'm doing my best to live as much of it, have fun and be happy.
No, I think that's the right way to do it. Imagine that for most of history, still including to today, for most of civilization, people have bought into the idea that if they follow certain rules that benefit a few people, they'll get their benefit after when they die. I mean, how crazy is that? Who buys into that kind of a deal?
You had this hilarious rant about that along those lines of people who these poor people who thought that they were, I can't do it. It was so funny. A couple weeks ago, we were talking about what they believed was, the end game, which is why they were so controlled. But yeah, it's we don't think that way anymore.
It's just people. What P.T. Barnum said, a sucker is born every minute. way, way, way underestimated it. And the reality is most people, they don't want to believe 4,000. This idea of 4,000 weeks is so horrible that they will take anything with no evidence that sounds better than that. And that's, and therein lies the story of all of civilization.
Oh, good. I'm still recording on one. I have 3 things. I got that. I'm keeping that. That's good.
All right.
Here's last final question. I'm starting a new endeavor.
Yes.
Because Robert Waldinger, he's this Harvard happiness study dude. I've seen him everywhere too. The key to happiness is community, friends, relationships, and men of a certain age really have very few. So I'm asking everybody, because I have a lot of thoughts about this and efforts on it. Do you have any male friend? Do you have a guy that you say go for a walk with, or talk to, or have a drink with on a regular basis?
I do, but he has 4 legs, and you heard him in the middle of the.
So you don't. So you don't have a male person that you see on any kind of regularity, outside of work or anything.
No, I have some friends, but it's when I was a kid growing up, I thought that the way life would work is I would grow up. And then I would live someplace and there would be neighbors. And at 3:00 in the afternoon, they'd call up and say, "Hey, want to watch TV tonight?
Can you come out and play?" And
and it never happened. People don't do that. It's like, and you're like sitting there waiting for to talk to your neighbors. My wife is much better at this. Like, she knows everybody. She knows all the neighbors. I've never known a neighbor and haven't had friends, but there is a better way, and you have discovered that way.
How? What is it?
Have daughters.
Oh, so you being really you have great relationships with your kids. I'm guessing you always have, but now they're grown up, and so they're very much in your life, and you in there.
They're brilliant, and they're funny, and they're great to talk to.
But they talk to you like on a regular basis, even now.
Even now, I mean, we talk every couple of days, and we text every day.
I say even now
every single day. And one's 33 and one's 31. Every single day, we text each other at the end of the day to say goodnight.
Wow, I love it.
So and I have a great wife, and I do have a lot of great friends. But there's no guy. I pay somebody to play tennis with me.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any. I mean, it sounds great. It sounds like a good. It doesn't. You have to be one guy that you know. But I go for a walk every Wednesday with this guy. He's he's a pediatrician. He's really smart, funny, and he's been a great friend. And he's
like 15 years older than me.
But then there's these other things I do, and I'm just all this research about the community and friends.
Well, my wife has a theory. All of her theories come from her focus on dogs. She always says we're pack animals.
Yeah.
And it's true.
Yeah.
And I once talked to a guy who was a scientist, and he had a really interesting observation, which was people are so social that when they're left alone in the desert or on a mountain and there's nobody around, they start to talk to themselves. In other words, that we are about that interaction.
Yeah.
And wherever you can find it, I think you should find it. And that means you take a walk, connect with your family, find people on social media, connect with them.
Do you think get a
podcast?
Do you think though that there's an issue? Your wife said we're pack animals, but don't you think there's a gender difference, especially for men over 40?
I think there is, but I'm just saying, I believe that basic theory is right. Yeah. I think we need to have a pack around us.
All right. I'll leave you alone now. I really appreciate all that.
Well, I appreciate it too. And I will talk to you sometime soon, I hope.
I hope so. Thank you very much, sir. Great to talk to you. I love it. All right. Bye.
Bye.
See? Wasn't that cool? Wasn't that great? Wasn't that thoughtful, intimate, honest, vulnerable? I love David Rothkopf. Very funny, very, very smart, and he just doesn't give a shit. I love it. I mean, he's just a really cool guy. I can't wait to get together with him when I head down to D.C., which I'm going to do pretty soon, I think. I gotta make a trip.
Okay, well, now it's time to get to my second guest on today's show. She is joining us for the very first time. She comes to us highly recommended from my friend Rebecca Vallis, who is her colleague at the Century Foundation, which is a progressive think tank that works on policy in Washington, D.C. She's a former special ed teacher who started working in government, and she explains her entire journey, which I think is really interesting. We get into the issues. It's super important. One of the smartest people I think I've ever talked to, Dr. Kimberly Knackstedt, joins me for the first time right now. TCF.org. All her information in the show links. Let's do it.
There we go. Kimberly Knackstedt, or Kim, as it says on the screen. But I feel like I should be calling you something very formal, what with all of your accomplishments. I'm psyched to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thrilled to be here. This is great. So excited to be with you today.
Yeah, you don't probably do a lot of conversations kind of like this one, but I think it's important that you do get outside the walls, obviously, of government and get directly to folks about and the public about these issues that you've been working on for a really long time. My question there is, how important is it for you to kind of publicize the work you're doing and have done, because it's clearly made such a huge positive impact in so many people's lives? How do you talk to people about it?
Yeah, it's funny because as a staffer on the Hill, so often, you're sort of invisible. You're the person standing up against the wall that nobody sees in a committee hearing. You're the person shuffling paper quickly to the member of Congress, and your job is to sort of be invisible. That's the role. And I didn't actually mind that. I was quite comfortable in that position. And the job is, to elevate the member. And it was really to get the information out through the member of Congress. But sometimes things went unnoticed.
Right.
And because it was sort of the issue of the day, and disability wasn't always the issue of the day. And then when I was kind of thrust into the position in the White House, it was all of a sudden like, wait, I have a sort of a microphone I can use. And all of a sudden I get to talk to people. And now being on the outside, I get to do that even more. And so I'm actually finding my voice again in so many ways, because I get to actually talk about these things and say, here's all the work that's going on. Here's all the work that happened. And it's a whole new world.
That's interesting. It's an interesting way of seeing it, that you got to kind of be silent and give the answer to the front man or woman, in your case, working with Senator Patty Murray, but then moved to the White House. I mean, I got to ask you about all that. I got to ask you a little bit about all those jobs. I think they're really obviously important jobs, and you've seen the polling and you understand people's perceptions of government, and it's so insidious, those views. Yeah. And so I want to, make sure we humanize and talk about the great work that you've done. But before we do, I always like to ask people, certainly the first time on the show, like how you became to be yourself. I like to ask the question about high school. Like, did you know you grew up in Oregon?
I grew up in Oregon. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you know where you wanted to go with your work, with your career, or with your life in high school, 9th grade, or as a senior?
No, I mean, honestly, even 10 years ago, if you said, you'd be in DC and here's all the things you would have done, I would have said, you're absolutely lying. There's no way. Honestly, when I was in high school, I thought I was going to be a veterinarian. I've ridden horses all my life. I thought that was my career path. So definitely a little bit of a turn, hard pivot. And so I loved anatomy and biology and sciences and math, still do. And then when I went into college, I really loved physical therapy. That's what I thought I was going to do. I loved working with kids, really. And so I was like, I will be a physical therapist in schools. And I was like, this is my career path. And then I took a class on special education. And I was like, oh, wait, I actually want to be a teacher. And did a little bit of a pivot. So I went through definitely a little bit of a.
Oh, that's really fascinating. And I think probably it's certainly nice for me to hear, because my daughters are 18 and 15. So a senior and freshman. And I knew what I wanted to do when I was young. And I don't know that I feel fortunate, because I don't know that's always the best thing. But your journey is veterinarian. And then you think about working as a teacher. Mm-hmm. And then specifically special ed, but never heading into the government space. And I want to ask you about how you made that jump, but why special ed? My mom was a special ed teacher. It looks even harder than normative teacher. What am I saying?
General ed teacher. Yeah.
General ed. Forgive me, teacher. It looks even harder. And I always joke about going to the classroom for 15 minutes. And if you can survive 15 minutes with a group of kids without shouting at them and screaming them and damaging them, much less hitting them, then great, pursue another 15 minutes. teachers do it all year long, every day, day in and day out. And you're adding to that what would seem on the outside as more challenging students that have posed all kinds of different challenges. Why head in that direction? What was it for you?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I didn't even consider teaching elementary ed, right? I did get a dual certification in elementary ed and special ed, but that wasn't even a path I was interested in. To me, I was really drawn to students with disabilities. Partly, again, horses were a little bit of the nexus here, but I worked with a therapeutic riding program, and I really enjoyed working with children with disabilities. I also, at the time, I didn't know this. I have chronic illnesses myself. I didn't know at the time that was part of my identity. I knew I was always sick. I knew I always was, I missed almost an entire year in high school because I was sick. But I didn't really own that as my identity at the time. That's something I've kind of grown into. But I think I also identified with the kids, right? And that's something that I've kind of come to over the years to realize, that's why I was sort of drawn to the students I taught. And so it was a really natural place for me to be. And, I think special education is also, it's about problem solving. It's always just about we can just fix this, but with this little thing, and we just adjust. And then you just kind of keep on going with your day. And I really love that challenge. So,
how long did you work with kids doing in that category?
Yeah, I taught for 4 years, and yeah, I loved it. I occasionally will still see things about my students from their parents on Facebook, and I won't age myself by talking about where they are now because I taught elementary, but it's great. It's fun to see the growth, and I love teaching. It was great, but I was ready to move on.
So you moved on to what, graduate school?
So I got my master's while I was teaching, but I left teaching to get my PhD. I saw the systemic barriers that my students had. So I taught students with it's the classification of emotional and behavioral disabilities. And so it's kids that have a lot of mental health disabilities, kids that are often labeled inappropriately with that due to race. And the structural barriers that were there for them, I had teachers that came up to me and said, why do you even bother? They're going to prison anyway. And these were first graders. And I finally sort of realized that I couldn't make a difference as one teacher, no matter what I did. And so how do I fix the system? And so I wanted to go back and learn okay, well, I don't know. This was my brain as a 20, mid-20s. Okay, great. I'll just go fix the whole system. Why not?
Well, we need people. I mean, we need people with that kind of inspiration and ambition and ability to, I think, understand what's at the root of the problem. So you can be modest about that 23-year-old young woman, but I mean, it's we're glad that you did, because look at you now. I mean, you've been working on that for years now. So go ahead with the story about when you get your PhD and what.
Yeah. So I went to University of Kansas for my PhD program. So you're probably why on earth Kansas?
I did. I honestly, I read your bio and I saw, grows up in Oregon. And then as you're talking about riding horses, and I have this fantasy about the Northwest and what it's like, because I spent very little time there, but it sounds lovely. And then you chose to move to Kansas, and my feeling about Kansas is different. But I didn't, I'm trying not to judge, or I kept that for myself. I didn't think, but I do think it's worthy of explaining yourself.
Yeah. So University of Kansas actually has the #1 program in special education in the country. And a number of my faculty that I took classes under at Gonzaga University, my undergrad, went to Kansas. And so they had actually encouraged, take a look at their program if you want to do, a graduate degree. And so I moved to Kansas for my, for my master's, and then went again for my PhD.
Got it.
It continues to be one of the top programs. So
great, top program. Yeah. But what's something great about Kansas? Go ahead, and you need to help me have a better image of our Kansas friends.
Something great about Kansas as a state, that's a harder one. Kansas as a university has great basketball. Lawrence, Kansas is also a little bubble.
Hey,
right
hold
around.
on. Now you're forcing me into defending Kansas because, I read recently that there was a really important campaign to protect women's reproduction rights. I'm guessing that was led by Kansas women. So I guess we can give credit to the folks in Kansas who worked on that campaign.
That is true. That was a shock, and it was a big applause to everyone there. That's for sure. But yes, as far as Kansas as a state, I have a harder time, defending. But I do have a lot of my in-laws are there, and so that is a positive.
Oh well, I didn't know that. We'll be careful. I love it. Great place. I don't want to make anything uncomfortable at Thanksgiving. So how did you then go into get to government work? I mean, you've done some really interesting and impressive jobs in Congress, on Capitol Hill, at the White House now, and now you're at the Century Foundation, which is this amazing organization. Did I say it right? The
Century Foundation. You did.
You guys are great. I got to have more people on from there. Of course, anything Rebecca Vallis tells me to do, I do. So how did you get to Washington?
Yeah. So while in my PhD program, I applied for a fellowship. It was through the Kennedy Foundation. And so actually it's the fellowship. Eunice Shriver started a foundation, and same one Special Olympics started out of. And basically the idea when it first started was, okay, we don't have enough disability policy on the Hill. So they would fund one fellow every year to come to the Hill and really kind of embed in the life of the staff wherever they're at, and try to bring disability policy to the Hill. And so I applied during my third year of my doctoral program, got the fellowship, moved within about a week, and joined Senator Murray's staff on Help Committee for the fellowship, and then never left DC.
Oh, that's interesting how that all unfolds. But I mean, just to help me understand, I mean, the foundation, the Shrivers, and what they've done with Special Olympics has obviously been amazing. But we're talking about a group of people that we now refer to as, having this identity of disability, which I think is really interesting. I could really learn a lot about the language and how it's used, because it matters, not for political correctness, not for respect, but those are all fine and well, because you don't want to be a dick, but the idea of understanding people's lives and that it is your identity. I really want to talk with you about that. And I know we can, but just quickly, working, for Senator Murray, getting that, what is that job? And how much came out of that? How much time do you actually talk to the senator? Because this is a committee job. You're not working in her office on her staff. You're working on the committee staff. I think most listeners have no idea about any of that. I certainly don't. But how did you get good stuff done? Or did you, do you think that you attempted to get good things done? Yeah.
Well, it was interesting because I was a fellow for a year with Senator Murray, and then I went to the House, and then I went back to Senator Murray as a committee staffer. So I got to do a little bit of all of it. But with Senator Murray on her staff, on the Help Committee, we did get stuff done. So this my second kind of go around with her as a staffer. Of course, that COVID hit, and so that was a whole new experience of how do you staff a member of Congress remotely with COVID, which we can dive into. But prior to that, you do, as a committee staffer, you do get time with the member. You get to dig into tough issues, and there's never enough time in their day, especially with one of the leaders of the Senate. But when you do get that time, you take advantage of it and you say, here's the big issue we got to dig into. Here are your talking points. And constituent voices matter. So you talk about that. But you also, the one thing about Senator Murray is she really valued her staff and what they were doing. And so you were out day to day doing the work of getting the evidence, talking to your Republican counterparts and negotiating legislation and really digging in on, the hard issues sort of every day and kind of working through that. That it all took a lot of time.
The help committee in the Senate is health, education, labor, and pensions.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, so much to cover there, but let's just cover kind of what you did and how it came to be, because you're working on disability. Mm-hmm. What do you think the perception of the government's role in advocating for people with disability is in general, and I'm sure you believe it's changing thanks to folks like you and organizations like the ones you're working for and people doing good government. But what do you think the public perception is of this idea? And it's really changed a lot in just the last few years, and especially as a result of COVID, I think you're going to tell me.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You know, sometimes you talk to people and they're like, we had no idea there was even somebody who, you know, even cared about disability that works in Washington.
Right.
And then you're like, no, that's like literally my job. That's what I do every day. And so that was encouraging. I had, you know, I used to love getting calls from folks like in Washington State. Sometimes they'd be routed directly like to our phone lines, and just like getting to chit chat with them and just hear about their issues. Like there was never enough time for that, but there were some folks you get to talk to and then just hear their stories and, you know, actually get to tell them like, no, we actually care about like, are you getting your Social Security checks? Are you working? Are you getting paid a sub-minimum wage? Like, is your kid getting an education today? And like, we would go through sort of those issues one by one and actually hear from them. And with the committee, we would hear from everyone around the country, but like, you know, that was the kind of the norm. Yeah.
I'll just ask one really specific question, and which is like when you worked both in the House and the Senate in government, so you worked directly hearing from constituents, people that are dealing with or classified as having some kind of disability, which again, we could talk about the language, but do you basically, you know, everybody is different. Everybody is on their own journey. That in this case, they have a vast spectrum of disabilities and how much money they get or how much assistance they get, what it looks like. Is your job in that case to like hear from all these people and kind of aggregate and collect their stories and then work to advocate for a policy that will help people as much as you can? Like, how do you do that? Because everybody's got such a different situation, but at the same time, the only thing I could think of is such a major triumph was like wheelchair ramps. Like that was a thing that got put in that vastly changed lives. And that was, you know, a one-time expenditure, and then you got to fix it up, whatever. I mean, but you know what I'm asking. How do you figure out what people need and then give them that, offer them that?
Filter at all. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of national organizations that help with that, right? Like they're hearing and from the, you know, they're kind of grassroots organizations and it all filters up. And the thing is like, you're not just reacting to what you're hearing. You have to be proactive. I mean, it's sort of like, you're reactive to bad things. You're trying to do proactive for good things. And it's sort of that balance of all of it. And it's also like, sometimes it's like, oh, this isn't something we can actually fix through legislation. This is like an implementation problem of a current law that we actually have to fix the implementation problem. And so there was a little bit of all of that. One of the things like as sort of a disability expert, can't be an expert in every single piece of domestic policy, right? Like that's impossible. I can't know every single thing about housing law and transportation and education, like, right. Like so my job was sort of to be a collaborator and to really work with every other person on, you know, the team to then say, how do we bring a disability lens to every piece of just everything we were doing? So if there was a bill, let's say on education, okay, then how do we make it better for people with disabilities? If there was a bill on health, okay, great. How do we infuse a disability lens? Now, it's not like we always got it right. Right. That's not how legislating works. But like that was sort of the role, is like be the expert collaborator.
So you worked, though, in two branches, as I see it. You worked, of course, in legislative branch, both in the House and Senate. And then you worked in the White House. I mean, the stories you must have and the people you must know. I would love to have a drink at some point and hear those, or we could just keep talking and whatever can be said on the record. Maybe it'll help people understand the reality of how things work. So we'll stick to that adventure. But I think what's interesting to note about your job in the White House is from one administration to another, and I've covered several now. Yeah. Priorities change, personnel changes, efforts change, morality changes. If you left Trump out, you just went from Bush to Obama to Biden, right. So you have more normative kind of appointees and a process of appointing them. I think what's interesting with Biden, the Biden administration is, if my understanding, they like created your job. You were the first person in this job, which helped me understand what that means, the point I'm making about the priorities of this administration, because we only look at the big headline items as triumphs. But in this case, priorities matter, attention matters, and with that comes resources and smart people like you. So what did the Biden administration, why did they create this job? What is their priority and morality and understanding of disabilities?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we actually have to go back one step, to the campaigns, actually. It was the first time, 2020 was the first time that every Democratic candidate had a disability platform, right? And there were some good people working on those. And so the Biden campaign had stated that they would create a director of disability policy in the Domestic Policy Council.
You were a campaign promise.
I was a campaign promise. The president actually embarrassed me terribly at the ADA event in 2021 by naming me during his speech, and all of the cameras panned to me. And then Ambassador Susan Rice raised my arm up as I'm sweating profusely in the Rose Garden. So
wait, is that video available?
It is. I don't think they actually caught me on it, but there are some pictures circulating.
Oh, I might edit something up. Go ahead.
The video of him actually naming me is definitely out there.
That's awesome. But what a moment that must have been for you, for sure. Geez, the president of the United States, not only does it say your name to recognize, which will happen at the State of the Union, he's saying your name to recognize the job that they've created for you to do. So, oh my gosh.
Surreal moment. It was also 100 degrees that day. And I'm trying to organize this event. And my mind is staffer mode, right? I'm a staffer. I'm staffing the president. I'm staffing this. We're getting this event done. And so then I knew it was in the speech, but I didn't think it was going to be a thing. And so, because we just staffed the president in the Oval. And so we just gone through it. And then he made a big deal of it. And I was like, oh my gosh, let me sink into the grass right now.
Well, I don't want to get personal